You're tuned to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, and welcome to you once again. As you know, the 2018 Hard Winter Wheat Tour of Kansas and surrounding states is well underway. Day 1 is all in the books, and Day 2 has commenced. We're visiting once again with K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato, who is, of course, on the tour and has been good enough to file reports. And Romulo, let's just recap. When we last visited, you were in Dickinson County, central Kansas, yesterday morning. Where did your route take you from there as you made your way to Colby?
Hi, Eric. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on air here today. So yesterday, every route went from Manhattan to Colby at different roads, right? And we got the southernmost route, so we went from Manhattan through Dickinson County, Marion County, and from there we just headed west all the way to Rush County, or actually Nass County, when we went north and then west back to Colby. So that was pretty much the route that we took, kind of the southern route as compared to the other groups. Our group itself got about 17 stops, and overall yesterday we had almost 320 yield estimates from all the cars combined. The average yield estimate for the route yesterday was 38 bushels per acre. Mm-hmm. That 38 getting, whenever we were talking to everyone and even within our own vehicle, that was actually above the majority of the gut feeling of what we had. So we generally do eyeball estimates for these yields as well, and for the majority, these 38 seemed a little bit higher than what everyone was expecting and what we were seeing across all the routes.
And the doubt there has to do with the tardiness of the crop development, right?
Definitely. So one of the biggest concerns that we have, well, besides the extended drought, of course, that the majority of the state has been under for a few weeks now, but the biggest concern that we have is how late the crop is. So we were anywhere from, the furthest along crops that we visited yesterday were at boot stage. And if we consider, historically, the last few years at least on this tour, the furthest along crop on this route would already be in the early stages of grain field. So that puts us anywhere 2 to 4 weeks behind as far as development goes. So that's concern number one. Concern number two there is that not only we are behind in development, but it's also a very small crop. Several fields that we stopped by that were at that flag leaf emergence stage or with the flag leaf fully out going into the boot stage, they were anywhere from 12 to 16 inches tall, and that's extremely short. Mm-hmm. So the crop doesn't have the biomass that it might need to really go through a nice grain filling period. So going back to our first concern, which is the crop being late, right? We were estimating that for us to have a nice grain filling period, the crop right now would need anywhere from about 50 days to finish in the McPherson region, all the way to about 80 days in around Colby or so, wow, to finish with a nice grain filling period, as we had the last couple of years. Now, the truth is, the crop is probably going to finish in 30 days around McPherson and probably in 50 days around Colby. So we're really going to be short in time. So the crop is going to have to rush through those late stages of development, likely, right, unless the weather conditions are just cool and moist through May and June. That's probably what we're going to see. And that's probably one of our largest concerns as far as putting an yield cap on the crop.
So how severe is that cap? That's hard to say specifically at this point, but just in a ballpark sense.
It is very hard to say, but if we think of going through grain field above about 82 Fahrenheit or so, that already decreases the amount of starch that the wheat is putting into the grain. And if we're above 92 Fahrenheit during grain field, it can actually go backwards. It can really decrease the amount of starch that is going into the grain. So the weight of that grain is going to be reduced, so the 1,000 kernel weight will be reduced or increasing the number of grains per pound there in the end. Really low, likely to have lower test weight and likely as well higher protein content. Again, that's all going to depend on the weather, but if the weather is close to normal, that's probably what we're going to see from this crop being as late as it is.
Romulo, did your group see much evidence of freeze damage to the stands that you scouted yesterday?
So we stopped in a few fields, and we were doing an estimate of number of tillers compromised by the freeze damage. Around McPherson, we saw anywhere from just foliar damage, about 35% of the tillers that the head was damaged by the freeze. So it was really depending on positioning on the landscape there, maybe planting date as well. But we saw from zero freeze damage through 35% tiller loss. As we moved northwest, we were mostly seeing just foliage, just cosmetic damage to the leaves. But we did stop in a field in Trigo County that we estimated about 20% tiller loss there as well, which was surprising to me because we weren't really expecting much freeze damage in that area.
Just reading some of the accounts from other tour routes, it sounds like the best wheat of day one was found in the far northwestern part of the state.
That is correct, yeah. So the far northwest part of the state, actually, if we look at the drought monitor that UNL puts together, the two counties northwest in the state, they are the only ones that are not in any type of drought right now. So that is correct. The wheat is actually looking pretty good in far northwest Kansas. It is late as well, so it's just now at the first joint, which is in that stage that still would require 70 to 80 days to go through a nice grain field period. So that's a concern, definitely becoming hot during grain field again. But as of now, it stands really in really good shape because of probably some extra snowfall that they caught during January and maybe one or two extra rainfall that just got the very far northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska.
Once more, though, plenty of stands are suspect in their condition right now. Did you get any sense of how much acreage might be actually not taken to grain, either grazed out or otherwise abandoned?
That's a difficult question. I mean, if we look historically, we have about 6% area abandonment, but we have had as high as over 20% area abandonment in years like 1996, I believe, when we had a pretty hard freeze. I only saw a couple of fields where producers were grazing out. I expect that today, as we head to southwest Kansas, we might have a better idea of that.
And let's visit about your expectations in full as you travel south from Colby. You're in Gove County as we speak, and you'll be drifting to the south and then taking a left, if you will, and heading into south central Kansas. Likely drought stress will be pronounced in this southwest Kansas area anyway, will it not?
Definitely. So my expectations for today is that we'll start seeing very drought stress crop probably here in one or two counties south. And as we move east later in the day, we're probably going to be looking more for freeze damage because the crop was further along in development in the kind of central part of the state. So those are the two main themes that I expect for today, probably drought stress in the early part of the day and likely some freeze damage in the later part of the day.
If there's a positive in any of this, it might be that there don't appear to be many indications of disease issues in Kansas wheat at the moment.
That is correct. We came across scattered plants with barley yellow dwarf here and there and continuous wheat field where 10 spot was showing up as well, but that is expected, nothing out of the ordinary. So far disease have been kept in check for the majority because of the dry conditions as well. In the case of fungal diseases and because of colder conditions in the case of virus disease.
So once again, the estimate of the tour on the first day, putting all the numbers together, 38 bushels per acre. Would you expect a similar number as you eventually arrive in Wichita this evening, or maybe that'll be shaved back a bit? What's your thought, Romulo?
I would expect with all the routes that we have going through southwest Kansas now and Oklahoma as well, that number should be shaped back a bit. That's what I would expect, and maybe because of some freeze damage later on the tour as well. Now, the central part of the state, we did have 2 or 3 inches of rainfall recently that really helped out the crop. That was what we were seeing around McPherson all the way to Great Bend yesterday. But in the early part of the tour here, I think we'll see some very low yield potential.
Well, we do appreciate once again you sharing some observations from the first day, and if we might, we will once again touch base tomorrow morning and see what this second day brings in total from the tour. Romulo, thanks so much, and good travels the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Eric. And if producers want to be tuned in to what is going on around the the wheat tour, just make sure and follow me on Twitter. That it's at KSU Wheat, and we're putting out information as we see.
Make use of that opportunity to track what they're observing in field. Romulo Lollato with us, wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. As he talks with us, he's just south of Grainfield in Gove County, filing today's report from the 2018 Hard Winter Wheat Tour throughout Kansas, and sponsored by the Wheat Quality Council, of course. And we'll return shortly with more on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you back. And now to soybean production once again and nutrient needs for soybean crops. We've invited by once more nutrient management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz. On several points, Dorivar, we want to give a quick overview of the general nutrient requirements for soybeans and then talk about the merits of a starter fertilizer for beans at planting. But soybeans, well, for one thing, they take care of their own nitrogen needs as a legume. So we can start with that.
Yes, that's a very good point, Eric. I think when it comes to soybeans, of course, we typically focus more on phosphorus and potassium. Of course, they fix their own nitrogen, but at the same time, of course, we have to keep in mind when it comes to nitrogen to make sure we have good inoculation and that aspect is taken care of, especially if we go into a fairly new area that has not been planted to soybeans or not a recent history of soybean growing in that field. So that's basically when it comes to nitrogen. Of course, there are some situations where there could be some potential response, very high yield environments and so on. But again, the yield response is very inconsistent for nitrogen. But again, focusing on phosphorus and potassium primarily, soybean is a crop that takes up significant amounts of P and K compared to other crops. For example, to put a little bit in perspective, a 40 bushel soybean can take up easily over 30 pounds of P2O5 and over 50 pounds of K2O. And that's almost 3 times the amount of what corn will take per bushel if we do that per bushel calculation. So again, the requirements can be quite significant if we're talking about high yielding soybean in particular. So we need to look at those 2 nutrients primarily very closely. Of course, soil testing is a first step to see where we are and what's the potential for yield response from those nutrients. In the case of soybean also is a crop that can be very efficient in terms of taking advantage of any residual P and K from previous crops. So if we apply phosphorus and potassium to the previous corn crop, soybean can take advantage of that. And again, it could be very efficient there. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind the total removal of P and K from the rotation. If we're going to do that, if we're going to put enough P and K before corn and growing the following soybean with that same application, again, we have to keep in mind the total removal of both crops in order to keep the soil test levels to an optimal level. So those are some key things that we have to keep in mind. There are other nutrients that could be important for soybean as well as we're thinking about optimizing yields. And typically we talk about some of the micronutrients, zinc, in some cases maybe boron. All of those things, of course, we have to look at based on soil tests, and we do have recommendations in Kansas for those nutrients. And we do have other things that we can talk a little bit more about, things like iron chlorosis. Those are a little bit more specific to certain soil types. But again, those are kind of the main nutrients and main aspects that we need to look at when it comes to nutrient management in general for soybeans. Of course, perhaps one of the first steps typically that we have to also keep in mind in being a legume in particular, pH is something that could be very important for soybeans. And again, we talked earlier about fixing nitrogen, and of course pH can really be a big factor in terms of efficiency for nodulation and nitrogen fixation in general. So again, those are some things that we have to keep in mind as we're thinking about planting soybeans this year.
Want to devote some time here in a moment to one of those specific nutrients being iron and iron deficiency problems, how those can be addressed. The merits of a starter fertilizer application to help with the phosphorus or potassium needs of that crop ahead. What about that approach, Dorivar?
Yes, and again, of course, we do have flexibility in terms of how we are putting that fertilizer. It could be broadcast for P and K, but specifically talking about starter fertilizers in the case of soybeans. And when we talk about starter fertilizers, of course, it's a lower rate of application at planting time. There are typically a lot of benefit in case of corn because of early growth improvements and so on. In the case of soybean, we don't see typically a lot of that starter effect that we see in corn. However, it's an excellent way to complement P and K in particular for soybean. And again, this will be the case perhaps where we put enough fertilizer to the previous corn crop and we're trying to take advantage of some residual fertility with the soybeans. Maybe we can complement some of that with the starter fertilizers. Definitely in situations where we have soil test levels below optimum, we can see consistent yield increases to that kind of application in the case of soybean. So definitely starter fertilizer is something that we have to consider for soybean. And again, whether we'll see a yield increase, a lot of that will depend on the system we have in place, what kind of soil test levels we are dealing with.
Is that something that you would want to apply in furrow or broadcast, or does it matter?
That's a very good point. In the case of soybean, again, it's very sensitive typically to potential damage to fertilizer. So we have to be very careful when we are thinking about in-furrow application of P and K in particular because of the potential salt damage that we can have from those fertilizer sources. So typically we'll prefer some sort of 2x2 application or surface dribble if we're going to do a liquid application. Those are all good options, again, as we're trying to minimize any potential salt damage. This will be for the case of P and K application.
Let's zero in then on iron chlorosis as a soybean production problem, and that refers by definition to an iron deficiency. What kind of issues does that deficiency cause to beans?
Yes, this is perhaps one of the most common issues that we'll see, especially as we go west in Kansas. We do have higher soil pH, and it's really a situation, again, associated with high pH soils, free calcium carbonate in the soil, and so on. So it tends to be oftentimes show up in small areas in the field, places that perhaps was level for irrigation and so on, where we get to those high pH areas. So it may not necessarily be complete fields. So it could be a complex problem, and there are really a combination of things that maybe we need to look at here for management. And, of course, fertilizer application is one option. But in general, we need to look at other things as well. Variety selection is a big part of that. We need to get the varieties that tend to be more tolerant to iron chlorosis to begin with. And, again, then maybe the next step is to look at some fertilizer options. And in this case, for iron chlorosis, we really need to be looking at a chelated type of iron fertilizer. And these are basically liquid forms typically that tend to be a lot more stable in high pH situations. And the contact with the seed in this case become pretty important. So if we are thinking about, we are dealing with a iron chlorosis problem, in-furrow application of chelated iron fertilizer shows very good results. And we have done some research in western Kansas with multiple locations where we can see significant increases in yield with the application of in-furrow iron fertilizers, again, chelated iron fertilizers. Like I say, in contact with the seed, that becomes really important in that case because, again, high pH soils, the tie-up of that iron fertilizer can happen pretty quickly if we don't have that contact with the seed. So again, a combination of in-furrow iron fertilizer, variety selection, those things can show significant yield increases in those high pH situations where we are dealing with iron chlorosis.
And coming back to the K-State field trials, looking at those treatments, the seed contact is preferred over the foliar application in terms of the overall response, right?
Yes, that's an excellent point. In the trials we done over the years, we also evaluated foliar applications, and this is something that has been evaluated for in other places, in other conditions for iron chlorosis, and oftentimes we tend to see a green up, a little bit improvement in terms of the color, but that typically will not translate into yield increases. And that's the challenge with foliar application. Like I say, the yield increase is not always there. And again, a lot of this may be due because of the severity of the iron chlorosis. We are just not able to put enough iron basically through the leaves. And again, that placement in furrow is where we really make the difference in that kind of scenario.
We are highlighting this condition, though, because as we see soybean acres push further west, this is where this problem could be more pronounced. The yellowing of fields, not across the entire stand, but sporadically throughout a stand.
Yes, and that's a very good point. Again, we do see a little bit more soybean moving west, and that's where we tend to see more of the high pH problems. And like you mentioned, this is very important also. Typically may not be the entire field, and this is important to keep in mind as well as we are thinking about potential management options. For example, the application of chelated iron fertilizers or any other type of treatments may need to be targeting those problematic areas. Oftentimes, especially if we're trying to come up with an economical management option, treating the entire field may not necessarily pay. We really need to target those problematic areas to see the improvement and ultimately the economic return to any management options that we're doing.
And all of that can be determined best by way of the aforementioned soil test. That's where it all begins.
Yes, a lot of these, especially iron chlorosis and again, other nutrients for that matter, can be really fine-tuned with intensive soil testing. Again, pH can go basically from the extreme where we have very low pH that is a problem to the other extreme where we can have things like iron chlorosis as well.
And we appreciate the input as always, Dorivar. We will have you back again soon to talk about another aspect of crop nutrient management. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz of K-State Research and Extension on things to consider in soybean nutrient management. Here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
The foal is all legs, like most of them are. But this newborn is really leggy.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I wonder why there is such a difference in feeling, or at least for me, between a newborn foal or calf. Newborn calves you need to see with a herd, but a foal you need to see by itself, with its mare. I experienced that again a few days ago when Martin, my son, forwarded me a short clip on the computer of a recently born foal. There was an earlier photo of the foal standing on long, wobbly legs with the mare, and while the mare was still licking its face, cleaning it. The foal is all legs, like most of them are, but this newborn is really leggy. On the clip, you see her, it's a filly, being led behind the mare to the small paddock. There it is released, and is ambling about and following its mother. The mother, who's a surrogate mom, is a good, steady mother. She leads but does not panic. She knows. We've had 2 foals here on the hill many years ago, popped out Martine's Pony Club. Pony was the mother. She, too, was a great mother to teach her young foals. Very steady temperament. It's not difficult to see and accept the fact that a good, steady mare brings up well-mannered foals. Cows never seem to care that much, nor have that influence on their calves. At least, I've never noticed. With dairy cows, we remove the calves, and that's it. With beef, they hang around and they gain. But they're not handled, the exception being the 4-H calves. Horses are with us more, and we know if we want to make them feel safe around us, we need to handle them and teach them. With foals, it's much easier because they are still small. However, they can be strong. By teaching them in gentle but firm and consistent way, they learn and readily accept. So when I watched the newborn foal being handled, I was kind of envious, but I enjoyed seeing it. The foal is one of a twin. The embryo out of the mare Wilkina was split, and 2 horses received an implant. Both implants took. Only sadly, Wilkina's foal was born dead. The umbilical cord was wrapped around the neck. I do not know the details of the birth. The surrogate mare delivered the filly I was talking about, a beautiful, sweet foal. The foal will grow up, develop its bloodline, and holds promise, but one never knows. In time it will be trained as a show jumper, but only after the bones are strong. It will take years before that training starts. It's amazing to see jumpers develop once they have reached the age. The ability to jump must be driven by the desire to jump, and that desire must be with the horse. It must have heart. When Pop-Tart, who could jump, had the foal we called Thunder, I found Thunder outside the overnight corral one time. He, soon after his birth, had jumped the fence. He must have jumped from a standing position because, roomy as the corral was, there was no room to make a serious running start. He, as recently born foal, had never jumped yet. The height of the fence was 4 feet and 2 inches, an incredible jump. Admittedly, the very top rail, a 2x4, had snapped, but nevertheless, the foal had a desire and a heart to jump. I can still feel my surprise coming into the paddock in the early morning, and Thunder was walking up to me. No fear, just happy to see me. That is exactly the feeling and joy I get from horses. As Thunder grew up, he became a neat pony. He stood in the sandbox while grandkids moved toy cars between his feet. The kids brought him into the house so he could eat from the dining room table, as all well-trained ponies should. I'm amazed they did not take him down to the basement, down the stairs. He did make the 2 steps from the living room up to the dining room. We have photos to prove it. As Thunder grew up, he became a very enthusiastic Pony Club pony with a great record. He was good, and he went to California. His sister was born a year later, named Misty. She was different. I've always thought that she was different because she was a mare. She was laid back. But just like our 5 kids, now all adults, all are different. So it would be with ponies and horses. Each time it is an adventure to see what he or she becomes. And so it is with this newborn foal with its left front sock. I hope to be around when it starts to jump, years from now. I remember when Misty was born. The morning was foggy. I couldn't see the town. Her coat was of a roan color, and later she turned more white. She became my older son, family pony. The kids and Guido and Emily rode her. When they moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, Misty came back to the hill here. She became one of the small herd. All gone now. Now I hold 3 skulls, all 3 dear to me, as all 3 have given me much fun and horse love, but now they're dead. I don't think cows give so much love. Some pigs do, maybe a chicken, but horses are different. They become a part of you, or you a part of them.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. And with that, today's edition comes to a close. We'll be right back here this same time tomorrow and hope you'll do the same. Meantime, we'd invite you once more to check out our podcast service. It's at agtoday.net or use your podcast app to search for it at Agriculture Today, Kansas. Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today over this, the K-State Radio Network.